Okay, welcome to the Bucky Weekend Call. This is October 15, 16, I do believe. And we're delighted to be on this call today. And so, hey, Joseph, how are you feeling? And what do you anticipate to get out of today's call?
I'm feeling okay. Got a little bit of a headache, but I'm dealing with it. I appreciate everybody being here, and I'm excited to continue with Utopian or Oblivion. We're coming up on the end here,
Yeah,
and it's a it's a we're gonna have to think about what we've learned from this. Where we're moving more towards Utopian, or more towards Oblivion. I've thought a lot about we've talked about the different concepts in this book, and hopefully we'll have a time for reflection at the end. But we're coming up on the end here. So, Manu, how are you feeling? What would you like to take away from today?
I'm grateful that things happen the way they're supposed to happen. I'm grateful that we're here, we're committed, and we are progressing in the understanding, trying to understand how, first, the Utopia in Oblivion, then secondly, how we can, natural fact, just apply things to make a change. So I'm very hopeful. That's what I expect, that we progress on that path. So John, how do you feel? What do you expect?
I'm feeling good. I'm feeling grateful. Another good start to the day, another beautiful day. I'm glad to be able to be here with you. I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to. I thought we had a family commitment, but that's been put off. So very keen to finish this section and hopefully be better equipped to create Utopia rather than Oblivion. And I always enjoy learning a little more from Bucky. Sometimes it's harder work than others, but keen to learn a little bit more today and to learn out of the exchange between us. So Steve,
yeah.
How do you feel and what do you hope to take out of today?
Oh, I'm feeling pretty good today. I didn't watch my clock, and I was enjoying my day, and suddenly realized I stopped to visit my daughter, and suddenly I was beyond the appointed time to make it home. So I'm in my car right now. We'll start the meeting and we'll participate. I've asked Joe to run the screen, and maybe John, if you care to read, and you guys can run it.
Sure.
I'll contribute when I can. We are approaching the end of this book, and I love the suggestion, Joe, of review. We usually, when we get done with something, we just get done and move on to the next thing. But these are 14 concepts that are critical in terms of how Buckminster Fuller thought were the tools we would need to make this a utopia. And as I look around today, and I'm looking at how our highly capitalized political system, I mean, I look around at what's running things and what happened with COVID and what about with the vaccinations and who's running things and how corporate interests seem to be beyond, they're out of control. And it seems to me that citizenry, they stopped teaching civics. I learned civics in high school, but they stopped teaching it. Nobody seems to understand what the civic responsibility is. How am I responsible if everything goes bad? And it's a bunch of micro decisions. If everybody around me is making good decisions, then good decisions will be made. But if I'm waiting for somebody else to make the good decision, and I'm just trying to take care of myself, and I think that's how most people do that. And I'm also convinced that it's really difficult to know what to do to make it work. So maybe when we get done with reading this book, we can kind of go back with it again, look at each one of these capsules, and then evaluate how these concepts work in today's market. What would we really have to do in today's society to implement these concepts? Maybe that's a good way to do that. So we're not just leaving it behind. I would be even for, let's just start reading it again and just see how we do it, but then do it from the context of, okay, how do we change the system? How do we make this happen for everybody? Of course, we can do whatever you guys want to do, but I'm sure glad we talked about it.
Yeah, repetition does lead to discovery.
Yes,
And
I agree.
if we did review it, would be at another level.
Yeah.
So I'm certainly happy to do that.
Well, good. I think that's what we'll put that out if we don't finish. I think we're probably not going to finish it tonight. I think it'll probably take 2 times to meet, but I think we'll just plan on them going back in and then doing it from okay, how does this work today? Because Bucky was like prophetic in some ways. He predicted a lot of things happening, but some of the things he predicted didn't happen, and it's up to us, you know. So good feedback, and let's keep that open. So knowing that's the way it is, Joe, I'm going to turn it over to you. I'm going to put my phone on mute. I'm going to listen to as we go, and I'm going to jump in and contribute when it's appropriate. But Joe, if you'd run the conversation, and John, if you'd run the conversation from your point of view. So if anybody thinks
Sure.
it's time to stop reading and open up for discussion, just like we've done in the past, that would be really good. Joe, is this a Word document?
No, this is a PDF.
It doesn't look like my PDF. You don't have the banner going across the top. Oh, there it is. Okay, good. All right.
There
That
we
just
go.
goes to show you. Okay,
Yeah.
dynamite. Wow, is that all the italic there in the top? Holy mackerel, we got a lot going on here.
Yeah,
this
we
is-
do.
Yeah, the italic is kind of like the sentence fragment introduction to what's about to follow. So I would read this one sentence at a time and take a big breath. But you guys, I'm going on mute. You guys do it the way you want to do it. Go ahead.
So I can to read
Yes,
Please,
please, go
yes.
ahead.
Concept 14, World Community and Subcommunities of World Man. City today must be a world-serving unit. The real urbanities of 1966 are world people, like Konstantinos Doxiadis. Does anybody know who Konstantinos Doxiadis is?
I don't.
The whole of humanity is increasing, not only its ecological ranging, but also is accelerating its pace. The children of the Doxiadis family of Greece and the Jin Su family of Hong Kong all attend colleges and universities in America, and all hands circle the world yearly as prototypes of all families of tomorrow. Okay.
So, Castellanos is a architect
Okay.
of cities. So he's
Ah.
a Greek architect and town planner. I just looked him up.
Okay. And the Jin Su family of Hong Kong?
And the Jin Su family of Hong Kong. That is not as easy to, they're not as easy to find.
Okay.
So,
You know, these two families are prototypes of all families of tomorrow. So this is from the 60s. Yesterday, only notable humans achieved travel abroad. Today, anyone may expect to meet anyone else anywhere around the world, and some anywhere in space. Well, Bucky was a little ahead of himself then, but he was prophetic, with no more surprise than was caused by meeting one another's downtown a half century ago. Humans are only hyper-consciously aware of themselves or their own parts, their tongues, eyes, and fingers, as constituting separate items when those separate parts get damaged. Otherwise, humans are aware only of the totality of being as a subordinate part of the total environment. At such times, they feel great. When humans first acquired automobiles, they were acutely aware of all the auto's separate parts because they had continually to repair, regulate, and replace them. Only muscularly powerful amateur experts could drive early cars. A half century later, almost any human can drive an auto, a coordinately whole extension of their integral organism.
yeah,
The outcry about automation in general and its emerging comprehensivity is for the moment only provoking hyperconsciousness of society. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think
So
that this is systems, this is a systems thinking approach about thinking about the
Yeah.
whole.
Yep. And he's talking about automation and the changes and shifting perception.
That's right.
So the outcry about automation in general and its emerging comprehensivity is for the moment only provoking hyperconsciousness of society. All humans and biological phenomena have always been automated. There will be a gradual subsidence of humanity's consciousness and specific awareness of the separate tool parts of its complex world-around network of industrialization, which is in reality only the externalized automation of its originally only integrally separating autonomical automation of its metabolic regeneration functions. Okay, can I just read that
And we-
again?
Yeah, we might want to
Yeah.
read that again.
There will be a gradual subsidence of humanity's consciousness. So we'll go from being conscious to being unconscious.
Unconscious.
And specific awareness of the separate tool parts of its complex world-around network of industrialization, which is in reality only the externalized automation of its originally only integrally separating anatomical automation of its metabolic regeneration functions.
I think Bucky really, and this is a belief now, that evolution is destined.
That
You
evolution
understand what I'm
is,
trying to say? Yeah. He believed that, and that's where, you know, later there will be some issues. Like if you take today America in the world, how do you put libertarians in the context of Bucky, of this evolution?
you can't. I mean, libertarians are, I was just reading about libertarians, one in particular, who is, very much in a nationalist and nationalism, and has actually, spoken about how, thinking about the world as a whole is crazy. Actually, Peter Thiel actually I was just reading about who's applied for citizenship in Malta. So, but it doesn't fit
Also,
into this framework.
okay, if you leave that stuff down and say, how do you, there's a whole movement of entrepreneurship today. How do you put entrepreneurship with this evolution that is destined? And how will you consider appropriation of fruits of entrepreneurship in this context?
How do we put the fruits of entrepreneurship?
Yes.
within this?
Okay, let me put it differently. Toward the end of his life, Bucky had large followings, right?
That's right.
Very large followings. People, at the end in the 70s, did really follow Bucky. And Bucky, okay, he had his belief, he did his geometry, he did his predictions how will I call it? He saw a future. And from a certain point of view, this future is happening. That around the world, consciousness and use in a way that is becoming subconscious, subsiding like the phone. I mean, the mobile phone is ubiquitous in the world.
Yeah.
People take it for granted. I mean, in Africa, in America, the mobile phone is like a right?
Yeah. No.
You must, actually, if you don't have it, you won't play with your mates. Finish. You must have a cell phone. So it's become something. I mean, it is like a revolution. Just 50 years ago, it was just, or even 30 years ago, it was something that wasn't like that. So this is
No.
happening, right?
It's happening very
But
quickly.
where are the benefits of that going? Yes, we have internalized the cell phone, the mobile phone. That's
Yes.
what I mean. But the productivity gains that came with that and the change, where has it gone to? Who is capturing it? That's where the problem is.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
It's
Because Bucky was saying that, he's saying that the city design must be what is calling the world, I don't know what the word he used exactly, but must be city serving a system that is integrated with world around. In other words, not a city that is accumulating fat just for your own sake because it can't. That becomes something else. It becomes what? Pollution, all right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Becomes
And that's where,
what's
to
left
me,
over.
yes, the examination of the individual in regard to this, what do we choose?
Right now, we're choosing Oblivion. That's
Possibly,
the
yeah.
unfortunate part. I mean, I don't want to be negative, but that's where we're going. And as far as the proceeds, as far as where the proceeds of something like the mobile phone are, that's a hard thing to answer. I had not thought about that. Essentially, who's capturing all that productivity? Who's capturing all that energy? Any thoughts? Comments or questions?
It is certainly not benefiting man
Humanity as well.
as Bucky dreamed of it.
No. No. It isn't.
You see, I just give an example. I don't know if you watched the movie Black Panther.
Yes.
I did
Okay.
not, unfortunately.
Wakanda.
Right. It's a metaphor. Maybe you should, I don't know if it's on Netflix or something, but you can watch it. It's basically about a medical or whatever African kind of discovery of the virtues of basically it's coltan. You heard about coltan, right?
Heard about what?
Coltan, C-O-L-T-A-N-E.
No, I have not.
No, coltan is the essential of any battery, lithium battery today. Lithium,
Okay.
you can't run without it.
Okay.
Okay, so they developed this advanced civilization, but they hid it. All right? Because they were scared of where it takes you, the two sides. They saw how powerful it is, but they saw how dangerous it is.
Right.
To unconscious people. So they hid in this kind of underground world, and they just came out at speed that we, ordinary humans, could not detect. And there is a whole plot on that, right? But coming to coltan, coltan is essential on any cell, any battery, any electric car, any PV, cell, anything like that. But do you know who mined them?
Who?
Coltan, 95% of the world coltan is in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And the miners are teenagers.
Wow.
You understand what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
It's like blood diamonds.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we are here, we are using it, we are in this environment, partly thanks to that, to the culture. What about those kids? So consciousness has subsided. It has subsided, but in a way that is not comprehensive. That put aside some part of humanity and leave them to live in squalor. I'm in no means saying advocating socialism. No. I'm just saying we've taken decision on incomplete information to the advantage of those who had or who didn't have information, and they're keeping it and drawing the profit of productivity gains that are generated through technological breakthroughs and labor put together to ensure progress and increase.
Well, what's the answer to that problem then? How do we address that?
We're still in examination. We haven't said, that's why I say, compared to the views, what Bucky said, part of it has come true, but we humans
Right.
are failing. And that's where the hinge of what he said is the individual who is in final examination. Do you have enough individuals who realize that they are in final examination of something? And that's where education comes very importantly. Because the answer to that is no. We haven't yet reached the critical mass of individuals that are conscious that they are in final examination.
But how do we, if we haven't hit critical mass yet, then I'm trying to figure out what has like prevented that. I mean, you've outlined some of the things here. I don't have an answer to some of the things that you've put on the table. Any thoughts, any comments or questions? John, do you have any?
No, I agree.
Shall we keep reading?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Because synergy, I believe.
I'm just refreshing my memory of the last sentence. Okay. Because synergy shows experimentally the behavior of whole systems unpredicted by behavior of the parts, and because the known behavior of the whole and the known behavior of some of the parts, at least three, makes possible discovery of the required behavior of the other parts, I assume that all planning of humanity's economic, urban and undertakings must start with world trending and possible modifications of the total or world environment.
Well, let's stop right there. What does that mean?
Okay, I'll
What
give you
type-
what I understand it to mean. If we look at COVID, the last 3 years, right, we can analyze various parts, and there is trending. And one of the world trendings is that a large number of, if not the majority of, employees will henceforth spend part of their time working from home and part of their time working from business premises. So as a result of the events of the last 3 years and the development of technology over the last 3 years, there is a new trending, and that trend is for people not spending all their time in a work environment, an office, in a workshop, in a factory, even in a shop. An increasing number of some places you can't do it. If you're making coffee, you've got to be there at the coffee machine. But there are shops in Japan that are staffed by robots.
Yeah, I was thinking about that just now. That's where the automation aspect of this
Yeah, so
comes
there'll be
in.
automation, but even just the number of businesses now that don't take cash. So there are a number of businesses that I know that I go to that just won't touch cash. You can't use cash. So you must use a card. That's a trend. But there's also a downside. If you lose your internet connection or you lose power, you can't do business. So what we are doing is, and we talked about Atlassian saying, well, every employee of the company can work from home forever if they want to, but on the other hand, they're building a huge office building in the middle of Sydney. So, because the other thing we're learning is that if people are all working remotely, how are you building and maintaining a team? You can do it to an extent with Zoom or Teams or whatever else, but there's still often a need for a direct contact. I've got a situation coming up, a mediation, and the mediator is prepared to have a meeting by Zoom, but the client has said, I'd prefer we're all in a room. I can get a better feel on people if we're in the same room than I can on a screen. So he's going to drive for 2 hours to be in my office rather than have the meeting by Zoom. So more and more meetings are taking place by video connection, Teams, Zoom, whatever. And that's a trend, that's a new trend. But there are also the other elements. So we keep discovering and being reminded of the importance of team, because if you've got people working remotely, it's very easy for them to suddenly leave you and join somebody else. They just change the email address or the Zoom connection. So what is it that people are looking at? What sort of relationships do we have with the people we work with? What maintains and strengthens those relationships? And I spent all day yesterday actually in a seminar, and one of the presentations was by a judge and a psychologist about the impact on lawyers of the last 3 years, the pressures of the job, the extra pressures of COVID, what's required for optimum mental health. I mean, that's an increasing issue, mental health issues. So that's a trend. And this last week has actually been Mental Health Awareness Week in Western Australia. So we're having new issues come out in the open. We're seeing new trends. We're learning to acquire new skills. I had breakfast with a psychologist last week who said, I could come in and we could do a session on chair yoga conducted from your chair, as a means of assisting people in their physical health, their mental health, and also as a team building exercise. So, Bucky was always analysing things, wanting to dissect things and understand what made things work. And so he's saying we need to be predicting the trends, but we need a certain amount of information to be able to identify and predict the trends. That's what I think he's saying.
Okay, Joe, can you put that text out again?
Sure.
I want to say something while Joe is putting that text up. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
What I'm amazed with here is that Bucky's using the word trend in 1959. That boggles my mind. I just put on Netflix or Paramount or anything, or Disney Channel. Trending is the big thing.
Yeah.
What's freaking trending? And suddenly it's become a commercial word. And the fact that he was so into trends back in 1959, we had Reynolds wrap aluminum foil. It was on television. And it wasn't so much like a trend. Like today, trends are more micro. And they go from community to community. And that's how we build this map. But for him to have the foresight starting to talk about trends back in 1959, we didn't talk about trends. We talked about what's the new 1959 Chevrolet look like. We were looking for the next season, the next fad. But this idea of trending has become so significant in our time. and our universes are becoming so micro and so macro simultaneously. Like, who would have ever thought that I'm driving an electric car because kids are mining coltan in Africa, for crying out loud?
Yes.
There's a micro culture going on in Africa. Here's this culture going on, and we have these trends going on. Oh my gosh, how complicated things are. I just thought I would just focus on that word trending. Bucky was so far ahead of his time.
Yes, thank you, Steve. What I wanted exactly, you know, in reinforcing what you're saying there, is a word there that is world trading. It's not talking about trending. It's talking about world trending and possible modification of the total or world environment.
But if you break that down, it's interesting because he talks about synergy, which is essential.
Right.
We're looking for synergy, shows experimentally the behavior of whole systems unpredicted by behavior of the parts. And because the known behavior of the whole and the known behavior of some of the parts makes possible discovery of the required behavior of the other parts. I assume that all planning of humanity's economic, urban and undertakings must start with world trending and possible modifications of the total or world environment.
Yes.
So, yeah, we're talking about the behavior of whole systems. We're talking about world modifications of total or world environment.
And he also talks of, you know, interestingly enough, the people that he mentioned, the city planners,
The architects, yeah.
The architects, they're both city planners earlier. I was thinking about that, even how you plan locally, how cities are going to work.
Well, haven't there been studies done?
Okay, let's take this way, all right?
Okay.
Let's take solar. And solar must work with battery because we have phases in a day, in the world, different phases. Right?
Right.
Yeah.
We must generate and store for use. Now, let's think about world. Where are the essential elements? Where is it that you have the maximum of sunlight? How do you put, how do we put this together? And how do we distribute it around for advancement and betterment of humans? And it leads different. I mean, let's just take, you know, the country that is the most advanced in solar power generation. I'm not even talking about the consequences. That country is Germany today. What happens? How can you put the majority of a panel or world in a place where there's no sun?
You can't.
Right?
Right.
It would have made sense to put it closer to where it is and closer to where all the ingredients come together to make it happen and focus on distribution of it. And then it's no more, you can't but think about what Bucky was talking about. On the sea cables with specific alloys and conductors to transport energy across long distances, taking advantage of the phases of the sun in regard to have a living on spaceship Earth and using that wise. And that flies in the face of the powers of the way we behave today.
The paradox, Manu, is illustrated perfectly in Europe at the moment, because the one thing that optimum energy generation requires is cooperation.
That's right.
You generate in the best place, you transmit over huge distances, the off-peak generating areas feed the peak generating areas. So, you know, the parts that are in night need to be transmitting their power to the parts that are in day and drawing the maximum amount of power. That way you need less in the way of power stations because you're generating in an optimum fashion. But of course, what Ukraine and Russia's illustrated is the dangers of the interdependence.
That's
When
right.
somebody who's supplying the energy can cut it off.
But you are seeing it, John, you can be seen differently. It is seen that the central planners didn't really get their acts together properly. All those who sit wherever power is and do things, they really didn't consider all the consequences. You understand what I'm trying to say?
No, I don't.
And that's why the energy question is the natural fact. Energy, we say, as a general principle, energy flows. Energy always flows.
Yep.
Energy flows to the point, to the line of least resistance.
Yep.
Let's apply that before we do our micro things. So the requirement was, if energy has to flow, what are the conditions for peace?
I see.
What are the conditions in such a way that there's no temptation to choke the line to stab you, because there's no more peace. So it takes the whole macro. He says we have to go macro before we come micro. Putting together the energy policy is micro. Peace is macro. And where we stand today is that I'm very, not that I'm scared, but it's just, we are on the very, very, very dangerous path.
Mm.
And it wouldn't spare anybody. Whether A or B are right today, the world is certainly a very, very dangerous place in comparison to what it was just 15 years ago.
It is. It's in a much more dangerous place. I mean,
Yeah.
and I think that, but it is interesting how you're capturing the macro, meaning peace, over, you know, the centrally energy. Because I would think, honestly, I would have thought energy as a macro, if as far as a category is concerned, until you just actually talked about some of the preconditions that it requires in order for it to actually flow properly.
In the anti-entropy construct, peace is a macro.
Makes sense.
Yeah, because whatever is atomic energy, that is energy, right? When we're talking about, if there is radiation, if somebody goes and, as they're threatening to do, to bomb a nuclear plant,
Yeah.
things are going to happen. It's energy. Energy is just doing its things. But for our survival and thriving, the macro of ours is something else. It's still metaphysical, but it is peace, in my opinion.
Well, I would ask how that's achieved, but that's pretty much, that's a too difficult, I think, of a question to tackle right now. But shall we continue?
Yes. But another thing here, another point just before we continue,
Sorry.
is just the principle that it says. We know that synergy translating to that the sum of a part is less than the whole, right?
That's right.
But we also, with that knowledge, we learn to do what you call deduction. That is one of the methods of generalizing, is that if we know that there are 4 and we have 3, experimentally, as you say, because it says synergy shows experimentally by doing. That is, how is our feedback loop? You see, how is our feedback loop working?
And that is how you can predict.
Yes, what we do, but we cannot just sit and say, we wait until synergy is at play and we are conscious of it, or wait, no, it says we can only kind of discover and unveil synergy by application, by experimentation, right? Synergy shows experimentally the behavior. We know that only by experimentation, by doing. But also, if we do, we have to be ready, and that's what they call examination, to take on the consequences and deal with them. So we correct the cause. And that's why he's saying, in actual fact, if you are looking at world trending and possible modification of the total or world environment, if it doesn't work, we have to be able and open to change. If what we were doing hasn't brought peace, we got to think differently. If it hasn't brought prosperity for the largest as expected, we have to tweak something, we have to change. Maybe we have to redesign completely. Okay, Johnny.
Yeah.
Yes. According to my speculative reconstruction, the ecological history of humanity around world has 2 chapters. In chapter 1, humanity, whose bodies are better than 90% water, lived in huts on rafts besides the rivers, lakes, bays, and oceans, for fish were the most plentiful food, and the rafts kept the humans safe from wild animals on the shore. Some of these raft dwellers were blown out to sea and predominantly eastward around Earth's surface, 3/4 of which is water. In the second chapter of all history, men learned to sail to windward, following the sun, to which they intuitively attributed their metabolic regeneration. Men worked westward, fighting into the headwind seas. In Japan, the original seafaring people have an annual Golden Boy Day. They celebrate by flying fish-shaped kites above the roofs of their homes, one for each of their male children. The kites symbolize the salmon, who swims and leaps upstream in order to regenerate. That is the Japanese ideal.
Okay. Why don't we stop there? And what's Bucky saying here with these first and second chapters of humanity?
First of all, we are largely water. We've lived on or by the water. The water's played a key part in our movement. In the very early days of movement, it was generally over water rather than over land. And initially we travelled at the mercy of the wind, and then we learned how to sail into the wind.
Yeah. Bucky believe, I've read into his stuff that, you know, all life emerged from coral reefs. That's what he's referring to here.
Well, I will say that
I deduct that he believes that coral reefs are the first living organism. I mean, first macro living organism capable of generating complex life.
well,
But the thing that is saying, I mean, the message is here is that we are learning. We learn by doing, in my opinion.
well, I will say this is that while he's not talking about fresh water or drinking water,
No.
that is one of those prerequisites that we need as human beings. And I think about that in terms of peace. And actually, that is a problem in today's world, is the way water is managed. So anyway, that's a little bit of a side note, because we were just talking
But-
about, this is more about travel, but it does get back to the peace issue that you discussed a little bit earlier, Mano.
But Joe, talk about, put what you just say, together with something else. You see, you emerge on the coral reef, and then you yearn for that mountain. How does fresh water occur? Through the biospheric cycle, right?
Yes.
Of evaporation, salt left, and water condensing at high altitude on top of mountains and coming down in the form of springs and flows back to sea, right?
That's right.
Now, you are yearning for that. You are at sea. You are salted. If you are yearning for that top there, right? Because you have that drive. What happens when you start a journey? Evolutionary, progressing. What happened to you?
Out at sea.
You learn to apply or ephemeralization start applying locally there. Because the farther you go from the source of abundance of salt, that is sea, in the coral, on the coral, the more your body, your biology is going to be re-engineered to use the least salt possible. Right? To survive as a whole.
Interesting.
So the more you venture, the more you adapt, the less salt you need. Right? And then you progress that way. That's what he's saying. The whole story, you observe the way nature works. Nature always, at certain point, is tweaking, and at some point redesigning and continuing. So if we want to observe world trending, we should be able to, in natural fact, be able at one point to redesign the whole stuff. That is, you have to be bold enough and frank and honest enough to convene the General Assembly of the world and make agreement and be bound to those agreements for a while.
I agree with that. I mean,
yeah, difficult questions, difficult things, but that's what we face.
Well, I mean, I think that's a tall order. I think it's hard to get everybody on the same page today. That's the unfortunate part. So
yeah. But really, we locally can do something. Let's just say,
locally we can.
Yes, let's just take the same. If John in Perth, where there's enough sun, because Perth is similar to Cape Town to a certain degree. If they are planning large scale solar there, they have to first already be thinking about recycling or solar panels, right? They have to be thinking about, let's just say, Perth-wide usage of that. Maybe it's going to better be used for the fleet of buses. You gotta know that Perth, the train is not that, there's a lot of drive, right?
No, we have more trains. We've got new trains going in, new lines.
Okay. So it's changed since then. Yeah.
But we have trains and buses, yes.
Yes, but use that energy, store it for use for commuting rather than individual cars. For example, is an increment better than those who can afford it, who are the wealthier people, get individual car and continue to crowd the roads, one in the car, driving electric car, and steering their ego? Does it make sense?
Does it make sense?
Yeah, it's a policy, it's a municipal policy decision or a country policy decision to say, yes, we're going to generate a lot of electricity, right? Apart from homes, the bulk of the use of it is going to be safe for commuting.
Yes.
If you commute and the cost of a fare comes down, there is helping a larger proportion of the population of citizens of a town. Does it not make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
That makes perfect sense, actually.
To
But
me,
that's a micro
if-
solution. So I
Yeah.
mean,
but if in the world, if oil really was like constrained to be used mostly for big boats going from continent to continent
yes.
and less in urban, I think that it will make a difference compared to what we have today. Every day, I take my car out, I'm guzzling, and I'm alone in the car driving to where I'm going to go.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? So those are also locally, individually, decisions that can be made, not individually, like at the local level, say at the city level, at the council level, decisions that can be made that have enough impact. But you have in the US, the city will have, maybe the state government, at odd with, not accounting for the federal, is a problem.
That's right.
Yeah.
Any other comments or questions? Steve, welcome.
He's back with us, and he doesn't look as if he's in a spaceship anymore.
He's in a, yeah.
I've been
So
listening.
we're in Japan, aren't we?
Yeah. Let me just comment. I've been listening to the conversation, and this keeps coming back. And this concept of micro and macro, and it just lives in quantum mechanics. We talk about local events, and Jordan Peterson is really big on solving problems locally. And so this is Bucky's micro concept in a big way. Right now in America, there's a lot of political stress, community stress. We're stressed because somebody claimed that the elections were fraudulent. Now, 62 court cases have come into the courts over fraudulent election or some aspect of elections being fraudulent. 62 cases. I think 59 of them were created by Republicans. Every case has been thrown out of court. Now, are our election procedures corrupt? Probably to a degree. Are they corruptible? Yes. Have there been localities where there have been computers have been manipulated to create some results? Yes. But there's this big lie going on that the election was fraudulent, and I have dear friends who just tell me it was fraudulent. And in spite of all the evidence, in spite of all the court cases. And to me, the solution is local. The solution is micro. I'm going to make sure, first of all, that my vote is in the bucket. I'm going to make sure that my vote goes into a system that has a receipt so that I know that my vote, that I have record of what I voted on. And so that way there's some outside validation that the machine is doing something properly. In other words, if I solve my problem micro, locally,
and I go from my ballot to my ballot district to the next district to the state, and I solve those problems. If everybody did that, the problem would be solved. But a lot of people want the national government to set up some policy, create some magic wand, have some law to make sure that the elections are legitimate. All I have to do is make sure that my vote is legitimate. And the problem is solved if we each took that personal accountability. I've been listening to this as I've been driving. I just had that rant, so I'm ready now to surrender, but that was my comment.
Well, it's an important rant because actually there's a concerted effort on a micro level to actually undermine the confidence of the elections. I won't go into that, but there is it's interesting how the problem went from it's very deep seated and micro. I can even put a link to the chat to a story that covers some more detail for people that are interested.
And then what happens is the people buy into that story, even though it's local over there. I buy that as my story. I don't legitimize my own micro universe. I don't make my own bed. I don't make sure that my vote is counted. And I'd rather buy into this big mystery, this big conspiracy, I'm going to check your link out, Joe.
Yeah. Watch the video embedded in it.
Cool. I'll do that. Thanks for letting me share, guys. Go ahead and continue.
Okay. We're up to approximately the whole of the last 10,000 years, aren't we?
No, I think it's in Japan.
I skipped Japan. I just read that myself, but not out loud. Okay. In Japan, the originally seafaring people have an annual Golden Boy Day.
Oh, we did read that. I'm sorry.
I knew I'd read it in my mind, but I couldn't remember whether I'd read it out loud. Okay.
Okay, approximately, you're right.
Approximately the whole of the last 10,000 years span of recorded history takes place during Chapter 2's predominantly westward movement of humanity. In the Eurasian continent, where 76% of humanity exists, this westward motion finally funnels into Western Europe. As humanity converged, it crossbred. Western Europe represented an amalgam of a myriad of previously isolated nations. The nations had developed through millenniums of inland inbred adaptations to unique local subsistence patterns.
So in there, I don't know, because that view of Bucky today doesn't hold.
Are you sure, Manu?
Yep.
I thought there was a lot of movement of people. We had the.
No, I'm just saying westward. It is eastward.
Oh,
and
yeah.
then westward.
The nations had
uncovering of evidence.
Okay. The nations had developed through millenniums of inland inbred adaptations to unique local subsistence, I think it should be patterns. Along the waterfronts, the sailors crossbred. Crossbreeding Europe, intermingling with the Angles and Jutes, poured into the British Isles to crossbreed even more westbound Indian Ocean people, inhabited Africa and ever further westward, tribally inbreeding inland isolations. Then crossbreeding Western European humanity jumped westward across the Atlantic to the Americas. For 10 successive generations, they have settled further westward. As they moved westward, they crossbred acceleratingly, not only with their own westbound Chapter 2 Eurasian stocks, but with the Eurasian stock of Chapter 1, which had drifted eastward to the American continents at least 10,000 years earlier. Into the North and South American continents and their islands, there are also flowed westward, both by slave trade and migration, a swiftly crossbreeding homogenization of the inbred African tribesmen. Okay.
Yeah, why don't we wait there and see, are there any comments or questions?
The reality is people
I'm just saying the dynamics is true, but it's not, he didn't see that properly. He saw it, it is a story that fit a certain, explanation of things. But today, this is just completely the reverse of it, as evidenced by genome and things. You know, the evidence is this one. One way of tracing how humans evolve is by way of you call the richness of variety of a gene pool.
Mhm.
Okay. Now, the farther you move from the source, some of them are mute, right? They express less. So if you now survey the stock still the same. In other words, all of the derivatives are still contained in the original, right?
Mm.
And there hasn't been a change. In other words, everything that you find on the derivative is at the root. But everything you find at the root is not at the derivative. So as humans move forward, further and further from the Western Cape, you know that? From where I sit now,
Yes.
as they move further north and north and north and north and cross to Asia through some link there are changes. Then they went and then back. And it's part of evolution, of differentiation and remixing. But what makes humans is that it is the same stock. There hasn't been kind of mutations that make them, let's just say, unbreedable. It is still 100% part of a stock. So it's like,
part of a stock.
yes, it's like you have a web and you took part of that web, you store it because all of it wasn't necessary for your journey. You use whatever that you have during that journey. And because it's still you, when you come back or you go around, you can take that one and ingest it again without it having become a poison for you that causes you to change irremediably. Does the metaphor hold?
Metaphor holds.
But that's science now. We are all Africans. Every human in this world is African.
Yes, I
And
think
they
it is
knew that.
accepted. It is accepted, isn't it, that Africa was the cradle of civilization?
Pretty much.
No, we are all Africans. John, you sit in Australia. 10 generations ago, probably you were in Australia. I mean, your forefathers were Australians, right?
No, no. White Australians have only been here relatively recently.
That's what I'm saying. Whiteness doesn't
That's
mean
true.
anything. It doesn't mean anything. Blackness doesn't mean anything. In reality,
Well, I think the indigenous
in the
people of
creation,
Australia,
in what you call, let's just call it humanity. It doesn't mean anything. I mean, I have members of my family who are engaged and married to people that look like Anne. I have members of I'm saying members of my family. I'm not saying relative. That are with people like John, like Joe. And there's some other one, people like me. How do you call that tribe?
Hugh beings.
Few beings.
You both know what? Nah. What is it? You get my point. And that's the macro that we're talking about in what we are doing. And coming back, as Steve says, hey, we know this macro. We know how to use a few parts. How do we use it to be in sync with a fractal of synergy? Right? I stopped my rant.
Okay.
No, appreciate that.
Welcome, Anne. Welcome
Welcome,
to
Ann.
our conversation.
Hello. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
And
Hi,
So we're in the middle of it, Anne. Here we go. Where are
Sure.
you, John? I
John.
think
Carry on. I'll just
Can you
listen
go
in.
on this?
in
Hey, Ozzy, what
California.
In
happened?
California.
Now, where are we?
In
Approximately-
California. you
In
said.
California. You want to click on that,
Oh,
Joe?
okay, yes. No, I've got it. In
Yeah, let me
California,
scroll down a little bit.
at
for
the
you.
midpoint of the western shores of America, crossbreeding man has become so genetically integrated as to defy superficial identification with any of the earlier inbred national characteristics of Eurasia. In California today, 1966, we find an advanced phase of crossbred world man poised on an epochal springboard about to fly both skyward and into the sea's depths around the earth, thus to open chapter 3 of history. In logical consequence of this historical trending, the United Nations was born on the west coast of America a score of years ago. Logically, the air and space vehicles of man's acceleration into world and universe citizenship are predominantly produced on the west coast of North America. Well, that's changed hugely.
Yes,
um,
sure.
The last 60 years have changed that completely, the last 50 years. Around the world, we find nationally named airlines, Ghana, Japan, India Airlines, etc. But the vast majority of their vehicles are California designed, developed and produced, as are also a large proportion of the new space and sea penetrating vehicles. California is in the center of the outermost jump-off pad of humanity's springboard. From this pad, humanity is taking off from its flounder snail and crab-like existence only around the two-dimensional bottom of the sky ocean world into its self-interference-free four-dimensional occupancy of universe. Very
It's up there.
interesting changes, because I mean, he's right. If you went back to the mid-1960s, most international aircraft and space vehicles were produced in California, but that's changed completely. Russia, China, Korea, Japan.
Texas.
Yep.
Well,
But
but
there,
even,
John,
but I'm thinking about.
there, John, you are again, you are sitting there. Let me
I
not
am
use
what?
the word sitting.
Well, I
Let
think
me
this,
not use the word sitting. You know what happened here? He was describing that instant picture of the world at the time of his living. And things
Right.
are always, remember, energy flows.
Yep.
Energy always flows. Energy flows to the line of least resistance. California was the least resistance, as you say at that time. Today, it's continued flowing and is getting to other places, finding where it is appropriate to maximum leverage and then render new things. You know,
Yeah.
how would I call it? Doping creativity.
I still think California still has the most creative. Essentially.
but that's moving, Joe. I think you're absolutely right. San Jose, the Silicon Valley there. I mean, wow, that is just bursting with creativity, right?
Yeah.
However, but coming back to Bucky's thing here, chapter 1 was coming out of Africa going north and east. Chapter 2 was when when the Europeans and others figure out how to sail into the wind and started moving west. And so now they came across the US and they hit the border of California. Bam, that's where the big concentration was at the time Bucky was there. But I think if we did chapter 3, suddenly it'd be more like now we're going up. We're going to Mars. Chapter 3, we have the French are doing jet airplanes and submarines. The recent issue with Australia getting submarines from either France or from the US, right? Plus Australia and China now is one of the big space guys. I mean, it's no longer stuck in California, right?
No.
It's everywhere now.
Beautiful, Steve, beautiful. I like to come into what you are saying there. Where does change happen? We've sung this all the time. Where?
On the fringe.
At the boundary.
At the boundary. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Where is California?
On the boundary.
At the boundary of what?
Western expansion.
No, at the boundary of what body? The Pacific Ocean, the largest by far ocean in the world.
Yeah.
And what is happening in Asia at that time?
At what time?
Well, in the 50s, after the Second World War, what happened?
The Korean War.
Yeah, but you have China, the
Japan.
turmoil of Vietnam and everything. What does it do?
Well,
It
Japan
moved-
became the best car maker.
Now it moves people from China across, from Vietnam, from the Philippines, from all of these places west. To them, what is it still? Is it westward? Yes, westward to America. That's why I have Chinatown, all of these places, all along the coast in America. But what was in California at that time?
In
Gold.
the 60s?
No, that was
Gold.
much earlier.
Yeah, gold was in the 40s and
The
50s.
80s. No, but in the 19. Sorry,
It was
in
the
the
18 late
Silic-
1890s, right?
1880s.
Silicon,
Yeah,
Oh, yes.
silicon.
the transistor, Shockley,
Transistor. Yeah, that's right.
1948. You
William
heard about
Shockley.
Shockley, right?
Yeah, the Fairchild Electronics spectrum. Yeah, sure.
19 where? 1948. You
That's
see
right.
the conspiracy of
Or no, Fairchild.
energy
didn't.
flows.
Yeah, and conspiracy in that
I,
case
I was
is
thinking
not-
of Robert Noyce, by the way. I'm
Now
sorry.
I'm just saying the conspiracy of the cosmos
well,
to
yeah,
allow that to happen.
there's a negative use of the word conspiracy, but the actual literal use of conspiring is breathing together. And so,
Okay.
yeah.
Yes,
So,
the breathing together of all of these flows
yeah,
converging into California. And it cannot just stay in California. It has to flow out of California to other places, guided by some other events again at the periphery, always at the periphery, because that's where the shock with what is different from the inside is,
right.
right? So at the end, in the 70s and in the 80s in particular, flow back now west to east to China, Shanghai, all of these places.
Yeah.
And what will it do? It will do what it does best, creating centers of excellence that are going to spread and flow back. That is what Bucky, in my opinion, is talking about.
Right.
We need to be conscious of those things in our planning. And that might require that we redesign our view of the whole stuff.
Yeah.
We'll
Look what's
see.
happening in Malaysia.
Yes,
Right,
and
Dan?
what Anne is doing with education.
That's right.
Yeah. But remember, it always happened at the boundary,
Right.
because any system is only tested at the boundary. You sail peacefully from the center until you reach a boundary where there is a test that you can't withstand. Information ripple comes back and you have to take action. But it happened always at the boundary.
So let's continue.
I do want to.
Okay.
Okay.
Go ahead, Joe.
No, I think you made a really important point in talking about the different chapters, especially because we're in chapter 3 right now,
Right.
and it's important to notice that and be aware of that.
Right.
Yeah,
See
this
where
is
that's
space
headed.
and ocean penetrating. Yep.
Yeah, that's exactly where we are.
And John, you started to say something a while ago about some research or something. Do you remember what that was? And then the conversation kind of got away from you, but you were trying to make a point back then. I was
Lost it.
going to make better note. Okay, good. It'll happen when it happens.
Hmm.
Okay. Ready to read?
So California is in the center of the outermost jump-off pad.
It's good place as
That's-
any.
But yes,
Good
Yeah.
place as any.
California is in the center of the outermost jump-off pad of humanity's springboard. From this pad, humanity is taking off from its flounder, snail, and crab-like existence only around the two-dimensional bottom of the sky ocean world into its self-interference-free four-dimensional occupancy of universe.
Yeah.
99.99% not only of all the research and development, but of all the operating controls of man's entry into the one-town world and its surrounding sky ocean are conducted exclusively in the ranges of the electromagnetic spectrum, which are infra and ultra to humanity's sensorial apprehending. Only through mind-conceived and brain-operated instruments does humanity command the operations of its birth and entry into world and universe citizenship. Education is therefore essential and central to man's successful transformation. That's actually so important, isn't it? That really without education, we're stuffed.
Yeah.
So the only chance of evolution, of evolving, is through mind-conceived and brain-operated instruments.
Right.
So that's how we command the operation and birth and entry into world and universe citizenship.
Which is the chapter 3, right?
Yeah.
And I love the fact that you went back to only through mind conceived and brain
operated
instruments. I love the way you went back to that, John, because I wanted to go back there. What a powerful statement.
First principle, duality, always at play. Mind, brain. And there's a primacy of a mind, always, over the brain.
So let's break that down. That mind conceived and brain operated instruments. What are brain operated instruments today?
Technology, computers.
Technology is brain operated instruments.
Okay.
I remember to push this button. I remember to flip that switch. I want to flip that switch so my brain operates the switch, but which switch to switch is that's the mind conceived stuff. I'm doing that white paper on a thinkable set, the tetrahedron and the thinkable set, and the idea that the interrelationships are experienced and what's actually experienced, what's operated by the brain there, and where does intuition and mind come in? And I'm really pondering this. This is a very powerful thing. And somehow Anne ought to be able to use this in her pitch somehow. If we could make that paragraph in regular English so that other people could understand it, it would be really cool.
But listen to this, very important here.
Yeah.
Okay, the 99%. And he says, he's talking about the one town world.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Steve, as an American, when you ask him what is capital America, he will say DC, right?
Probably.
But Steve, as a world citizen, when they will ask him at that time, what is the capital of his citizenry, he will say California. And that would be valid. That's what Bucky is talking about here. He's talking about one town world, one town. This world, this spaceship is one town.
I'm gonna suggest that the capital of the one town world is the individual. is each micro person as they participate. That's where
Is it not the consciousness? Is it not the common consciousness of that? That is then the capital?
yeah, I
The
think
common consciousness, the common consciousness of belonging.
yeah. But and you've missed a lot of what we talked about today, and there's been a lot of very weird stuff. But one of the things we talked about was having micro solutions and getting up and making my bed and making my vote count. And if every human being made their vote count, then the voting system would be fine. But the trouble is somebody buys into a story that voting didn't work. And instead of me making sure my vote counted, I buy into that story and I forget my local involvement. This is why education is so critical.
I was just about to say, if you look at the level of education in the United States generally,
yeah,
and I feel equipped to comment because my brother was an educator and lived there for many years. And he said the general level of education, the general government primary school and secondary school, and the usual government university was of a very low standard globally. You know, he worked with Microsoft for some years, and he said it was only by importing really bright Indian graduates with,
right,
computing degrees did Microsoft tap into all that sort of expertise.
Wow.
So we all agree. In fact, this is very Asian, isn't it, Anne? Lao Tzu.
Yep.
It's all about teachers and education. The Asians have always appreciated the incredible importance. So many of them have come to Australia with no education, but the parents have worked hard to give their kids the best education possible, to give them a future. And so if we accept that the level of education generally in the United States is so poor, look at how many people believe everything Trump says.
yeah.
Let's say about the
Mind-boggling.
education system. That it is accelerating that movement of power, that movement of research, search, development from those educated in America. Many of them may still be there, but with overseas degrees or degrees from the best of the American private universities and schools. They certainly are world class, but they're a small proportion of the American education system. And even in Australia, I'm embarrassed by what's happening in many areas of education. It's not as good as it used to be. So with education goes the movement of mind conceived and brain operated instruments.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we
Keep
get
up
all
the good
this.
work, yeah.
Sorry, John, you complete?
I was just saying Anne's work is essential.
Well, yeah. And I was going to say in the West, in America here, we're worried because our education, any kind of tests that come out of China, they kick the US students in the butt. I mean, our education standard is so low compared to what's going on in China. And what I was going to say is that we kind of look at China like it's the big economic power, but I'd say that what Anna's doing down there in Malaysia, I mean, if you took a latitude, and I don't know what latitude you are, but you're under the Chinese, you're that part of that thing. And I think that and this would be really good, Anne, for you to go back through this, because he talks about the first chapter in history. Human beings came out of Africa, went north and east because they followed the wind, or they followed the wind and they followed the currents. And then they learned how to navigate against the wind and started moving west. And this is where he talks about the third chapter is the global town, is every person gets to participate now, because we're no longer tied to the wind and tied to the currents. We're now able to move into chapter 3. And I think this would be a good chapter for you to review. And it's not really clear. It's very topological,
Yes.
but the ideas are there. And somehow if you could put words to it and re-express what Bucky said, and you used it as part of your pitch, it would be really good.
Sure.
Can I share something here?
Yeah.
Please.
And it's for Anne. We've been talking about this, it started this with synergy, the power of synergy. That synergy has experimentally demonstrated this. Now look in the chat, look at what I put there. For now, it might not mean anything. That sum of digit 1 to n, is n times n plus 1 divided by 2.
Yeah, that's that
That is
cosmography
synergy.
stuff. Yeah.
It's always true. For integers, sum of 1 to any number that follows all of those digits, that is the formula. It works all the time. That is synergy. Now imagine this one. You have n integers that follow, and you know n minus 1. You know to n minus 1. And you also know that this formula exists. Can you find the n? The answer is yes. If I know, for example, if you take the series 1, 2, 3, 4, if I know the sum of that, if I know 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, I will know that 4 follows. If I knew 10, that the sum of it is 10. Do you get me?
Yes.
If I knew that the sum of it synergetically is 10,
Well, it goes back to what he was saying earlier about the
yes,
sum
then
of the parts.
experimentally, I can deduction. I can deduct 4. It's only my mind that can do it. My brain only store 1 to 3. 4 wasn't stored by my mind. I anticipated 4 through having known that the whole is 10.
And this is how you can. This is how you can predict the parts that he was talking about a little bit earlier.
Yeah, this is how you can build, because you only have what you have stored or physically that you can see, that you can manipulate.
Yeah.
But
that's
you
a good
can build it
example.
into a way that accommodates for a richer possibilities.
That's a really good example.
Okay, I just wanted to put it very simply to illustrate this. It's very important. It is always work in progress. Our anti-anthropic occupation are always, as Steve would say, work in progress. Eh? Life is work in progress. And that's why we try to hand the baton. In every high spiritual book or holy book, there's always the notion of the baton. I've run, what is the expression again? I've run my course, but the course continue, right? I have to run it in a way that I can hand it in good shape. And I say, I'm going to rest in peace, isn't it? That's the whole notion of our anti-anthropic endeavors into thriving, sailing on evolution. Because we can't do anything about real evolution at its largest level. What can we do? We can only try our best to sail with the best chances of success. That's why Bucky in that sentence is saying, now it's now possible to have utopia. You remember what John was reading at that sentence? He said, it is now possible to have utopia.
So I interrupted the share, Joe, so that we could see each other in the thing. Go back and maybe share that paragraph. Let's look at the sentence that Manu is talking about and then continue to read if that's appropriate. So
Yeah.
want to reshare?
Well, the statistics are very interesting because if you look at it, this is the fundamental, yeah, we're up to the fundamental concepts, aren't we?
Right.
The fundamental concepts of humanity are transforming overnight from the working assumption of man as a physical and economic failure, as inexorably demonstrated throughout the whole of past history, wherein only 1 in 1,000 lived out his days, and only 1 in 100,000 lived out his days in economic success.
That's a constant trend throughout this, is that he talks about the evolution of the economic aspects of things, about how people, even their living conditions have changed.
That's true.
So,
And there have been huge advances, but there are areas where we're going backwards very quickly at the moment.
agreed.
Only the last 12 years of history, so that's from 1954, because he's writing this in 1966. So for only the last 12 years of history has it been scientifically acknowledged that all humanity may now be physically and economically successful. So I think that was true when he wrote it. Humanity's mastery of vast, inanimate, inexhaustible energy sources and the accelerated doing more with less of sea, air, and space technology have proven Malthus to be wrong. Comprehensive physical and economic success for humanity may now be accomplished in 1/4 of a century. Now, we read somewhere that his 1/4 of a century dragged out a lot longer because in part of government interference. For the first time in history, it is to be assumed now and henceforth that it is normal for man to be a physical and economical success, as normal as it is for a hydrogen atom to demonstrate the success of its designed interpatterning potentials. Now and henceforth, it is not only normal for man to be a physical and economic success, but to do so without endangering the success of any others and without interfering with the degrees of freedom of others. And that's where we've gone backwards so far since 1966. The design science revolution is underway and is still underway, but governments and vested interests have really interfered with what Bucky said was possible.
Agreed.
Normal for man to be a physical and economic success, to do so without endangering the success of any others and without interfering with the degrees of freedom of others. The powers such as Russia and China and North Korea have certainly limited the freedom of others, and that's increased. I mean, I think of visiting China a number of times during, say, between 2002 and 2009, and feeling quite safe and free. And that certainly isn't how I think I'd feel in China at the moment. So what's happened? Why have we screwed up so badly?
John, would you please finish that last sentence, and then that'll finish our reading for today.
A design science revolution is underway, or you want me to read the next?
Yeah, that's it. That you didn't finish that. I didn't hear it being finished.
Yeah,
so
he
that's
did.
where we'll
Yeah,
end.
I did read it. I did
You
read
read
it.
it.
Yeah.
You read
Okay,
it.
wonderful. But Bucky, like right now, let's go ahead and stop sharing and let's end this up. Let me just say, I just was late to this call tonight because I stopped by my daughter's house, and here's my grandson, who's probably around 19. He is, in terms of me, he's completely dysfunctional, but he is totally self-actualized. He's totally happy with his life. And where does he live? He lives on his computers. He does computer games and he writes music. And he's totally fulfilled. He's stretching, he's growing. I'm looking at him going, there's a guy who's actually experienced a degree of fulfillment. And yet if I held him up to any standard, economic standard, he wouldn't survive. And I think that we always we're measuring everything in terms of quarterly profit. But we've got this science revolution that Bucky talked about. There are tons of YouTube millionaires, little guys who just set up a little tribe, started doing some stupid little song, and they're making money. And there are people who do computer gaming, and they're in a little community, and they're competing for hundreds of thousands of dollars. And they're not part of the big economy. They're very successful in their own right. And it's so weird to see the universe being chopped up into these little tribal centers in our global thing where a person can make a difference in their own life, and there are no political boundaries necessary.
That's
Or
not sustainable though.
Well, these guys on YouTube are sustaining.
Yeah,
TikTok.
some of it is, I think, Joe, there's an Englishman named Professor Charles Handy, who was very, very bright and quite a futurist, who wrote a number of books. One of them I remember is called The Empty Raincoat, unusual title for a book. But he talked about what the future held. He must have written that 40 years ago, something like that. Anyway, Professor Charles Handy, The Empty Raincoat. But he said, where in the past people have held one job for a lifetime, that's not the future. There'll be portfolio employment. One person may have 2 or 3 or 4 part-time jobs at the one time. Those who have full-time employment in one job will be the exception. And he talked about the sorts of changes that the future would have. And, you know, we see young people who hold down 3 or 4 different part-time jobs. So the nature of employment has changed hugely. And certainly the last 3 years, I mean, we've never had the turnover of staff we have in the last 20 months. You know, if you heard of the Great Resignation, it's just the Great Rotation. But people are so ready to move on and to move into or out of a job or into or out of an industry. And to a degree, I think that will become more difficult for them. At the moment, where there are more jobs than there are people looking for them. But as some of those jobs are replaced by technology, I've all told you the story about the hairdresser friend of mine who recruited a hairdresser, but at the last minute she said she wasn't coming. She had a job driving a truck for a mining company in the north of Western Australia. But what about when all the trucks are driverless, which is what they're moving towards at the moment?
Right.
So when technology takes away the jobs, the people who've given up their hairdressing or their office work or whatever to go and earn more money, but no longer term future, those jobs will disappear. So,
and as 3D, go ahead. And I was just going to say, as 3D printers start to make things more readily available without normal distribution channels, I mean, we're really looking at an amazing time coming up ahead here. Yeah. Okay, well, it's 10:45 and there's 5 of us on the call. So if we each take 5 minutes, we're going to go over our time. And
sorry, I'm teasing you. Look into the chat.
Yeah.
I'm teasing Joe.
So
that
this
is the definition of sustainable.
Sustainable.
Got it, you know.
Able to be maintained at a certain level or pattern. 2, able to be.
I'm the one who call it pattern. Pattern is my word.
Oh, pattern was your word? Okay,
yes.
Good. Able to be upheld or defended. Question, are patterns permanent in a universe where energy always flows to the line of least resistance?
No.
This is entropy. This is entropy.
It's for Joe.
Yes, it is. I'm going to email it to
talking,
myself
say
now.
It's not sustainable.
Do you want some ketchup, Joe? Okay, Anne, you kind of came in late, but you got some good stuff here, and we didn't get to hear from you. So how are you feeling? What's going on for you? And then tell us your takeaway and then pass it along.
Sure. Thank you very much, Steve. And hi, everybody. Yeah, I was listening and I caught up towards the end. I know the whole essence of what today's discussion is about, right? And one of the big takeaway is this, the education. Yeah, you know, I just want to let you know what happened in the West because I started looking into this. The reason why we are doing what we're doing right now is that I merged the East and the West, you know, at its highest level. What happened and on the East side, if we don't do what the West is doing, we're going to die here as well. Okay, but on the West side, what has happened is that this comes from education, teaching students to come from the space of lack. Yeah, and it's one or the other. It's not about having both or 3 or 4 or 5. It's you either have this or you have that, because this comes from education providing one answer, and they accept one answer kind of thing from a very young age, right? So what happened, I realized in the Western education was that when they moved into teaching more holistically, the holistic education became separate from the academic side. Okay, and so the students enjoying learning when they're in primary, but then there's this lack of linking it to let's say the academic focused side. Yeah, I realized that having traveled to Australia, to UK, and like having taught in the Canadian system, and also the exposure to the American education system, right? In countries like Australia, UK, US, the learning was fine, but then because of lack of the academic link for math and the sciences, it became a problem at the upper high school level. Okay, I spoke to Singaporeans who were teaching in Australia, and I was talking to Hong Kong people who have moved to Australia, to UK to study, and choosing not to go to UK anymore, So that's the thing I'm coming from. So what I realized is in many of the Western countries that going into one or the other, and that's what the teachers have done. So by not merging the two together, the academic and the holistic thing to its highest level has gotten the Western education falling short of what the East is producing, where the academic standards are concerned. Right? Now, Canada is about the only country I think that has a really, really nice marry of both. Okay, and so that's how we started changing out the education for the East. Without the Western style thing, we're going to die here too. The majority of us are going to be struggling when things start to shift out and so on and so forth, right? That's my takeaway. My input as to the observation of what happened with education. Yeah. Now, so in order to transform, we really need to pull the human component, because one of the biggest issues for a lot of education, and the East is starting to show this as well, where young people are made to feel lesser because they don't conform to a certain group. So that one has to be removed. The minute you start removing that, the two can merge. Okay, because we were starting to have this in Malaysia as well, the in group and those who are the cool group, and and I was like, no, we can't go that direction. Yeah, but in Asia we have another issue of our races as well. I was seeing it happen in our school. It wasn't when I was young, but it's happening in our school now, where the Chinese-speaking Chinese don't really talk to the English-speaking Chinese, and the Malays and the Indians don't really mix with the other races in school, because it's become pretty segregated within a whole ecosystem itself. Okay, so those are some of the issues that we are facing, right? But the East on its own, like right now we're talking about India and China, and we realize geographically Malaysia is at a very critical point, like a location, because we work very closely with both India and China, because Chinese are here, Indians are here, we've integrated. But if an Indian were to go to China, they won't survive there, or Chinese go to India, they won't survive there. Right? So that's another thing that is so people from India and China are now starting to talk to Malaysia to be that midpoint to bring the two together, because the two superpowers are now starting to talk to each other, but they can't go this side to that side to this side. Food alone, lifestyle alone, they won't be able to do it. Okay, wow. And the one other thing that I realized was, yes, in our school as well, we already knew that you cannot hold people to a job anymore. So my people can also own businesses while they are working with us. Yeah. And yeah, it has to happen more and more. They can also be a YouTuber. They can do their own side hustle, etc. And we try to integrate their side hustles into our school as well.
Mm.
Yeah. Okay.
You're legitimizing the side hustle.
Yes.
15 years ago, you would have thought I was saying something really illicit. A side hustle. Doesn't that sound kind of illicit? And yet
It does.
it's the future. It's
Yeah.
the side hustle. Yeah.
And it's that's what the young people in my school are saying, are using now. They're doing that. They have a side hustle, and it's like an in thing, not just an in thing, but it's kind of an accepted thing as well. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, that's my big takeaway today. And Manu, how do you feel takeaway today?
I really feel like excited. And I really feel what I wrote in the chat there. And that was inspired when you were talking, Anne. Education is from Latin educere, to lead out. In our parlance, what does out mean? What does lead out mean? It is radiative, is divided. It is derivative. We've been talking about this language. Then goes out and then come back around, multiplying gravitationally back to us. Right? And that is the notion of consciousness. Things out and back, richer, and we're conscious and we expand. And that's what it is to me. And only geometrical, spherical geometry is important for that. And I wrote that because you talk about education without mathematics. Mathematics is a language. It's something that allows us to understand in a way how nature works. And then the other point that Anne talked about, still you know what post-it is? Post-it.
Okay.
Oh, the post-it, 3M and the story of how the post-it was created.
Yes.
Oh yeah, sure.
Isn't that what you were talking about, Anne, and that Steve emphasized on?
No. Sorry, I don't know the post-it story.
Well, it was a side project.
All right.
It was dreamed up
and it
free
became
time.
mainstream. And you were talking about Malaysia trying to bring together by example. Malaysia is tiny in comparison to China, in comparison to the US. Tiny. You are small, drop in the sea. But that drop is trying to do something on the side that will possibly revolutionize and change globally how we feel. And that is important. And that's why I think I'm very, really honored to always that you come, when you come, Anne, because what you're doing is absolutely, absolutely important. Education, education, education. All is about education. Education is not in the classroom, it is a life commitment of a conscientious you being to live anti-entropically. Learning synergistically from experience, by experimenting, doing, taking in, associating. And that also involves how you communicate, how you relate, how you go about others. And to me, that's the biggest takeaway here. It is exponentially powerful. Thank you. And really appreciate, I love you guys. Steve, how do you feel? What do you take away?
Yeah, I let me go last. Go ahead, somebody else. Who you pick?
Oh, John? John has been?
Okay. Grateful, excited, concerned. I think what we're talking about today is really important to our futures and the futures around us and even the future of the planet. Well, that seems a little presumptuous, but we can do our little bit. Who knows who we can influence and who they can influence, and can all flow on. I think it's really important, and I want to understand it more, and I wouldn't mind revising some of what we've done today. So that's where I'm at. So Joe, how do you feel? What do you take out of today?
I'm feeling grateful as well. And thank you, Anne, for sharing what you were talking about just a moment ago. I really liked the line. I keep thinking about it is when we're talking about mind and brain, mind conceived and brain, what was it? Brain apprehending, or brain, now I'm forgetting it.
Brain starts.
Yeah, mind and brain. Yep.
It was mind and brain, and essentially how that interacted with the computer. But essentially, our minds are shaped by our education, and ultimately, that's what I was thinking about. Where education is about a lifelong learning experience, and this is what this is when we're here. Every time I come here, Manu's examples in the chat, everybody's thoughts, you know, to make this, to take Bucky's words and to make the world more understandable to myself. That's what we do here, and I'm very grateful for that. And you know, I know it's what starts at 5 a.m. for Manu every day, so you know, every Sunday. So thank you for that. You know, and that's my takeaway is I'm grateful and understanding just how important it is to be here, and reaffirming that. Steve, how do you feel? What are you taking away from today?
Gosh, it's 1 minute before I have a minute. I have all 60 seconds. And then I just wasted it by being aghast. I'm just really excited. I'm so delightful. We have a small but mighty group here, and we're looking at this very important stuff in ways that's illuminating in many ways. I posted a couple things in the thing about the story of the Post-it. 3M didn't, he invented this stuff, and 3M didn't want it because it wouldn't last forever. You could put something down, but then you could pull it up. It wasn't any glue that worked. And so he just got frustrated. He made up his own, he just made up things and stuck them around his office. People loved it. So then he started making them for the people in his office and 3M. Then 3M said, oh, that's a good idea. Let's market the thing. So it was a mistake. It didn't work. And somehow it became the cool thing. So anyway, boy, I'm really excited for the suggestions of coming back and looking at this one more time, having read this book, and then come back and see what we can do. What are these 14 design concepts, these critical concepts? Why did Bucky say they were so critical? We only have about 3 pages left to go of this book. So we'll probably finish it next week, if not the week after. And if you're all ready to go, we'll just jump back into it again and maybe design some strategies. Like, what questions are we going to ask when we get to each section, and try to set up a thing in advance. Not try, but let's set something up in advance. I'm real grateful for each of you here, and for Joe for running the thing tonight, and for John for continuing to read, and Manu for his topological input. Sometimes it drives me crazy, Manu. It's like I'm trying to shoot the balloon that's floating through the air, but I love the way you keep things topological and keep stretching my brain, because really what Bucky is talking about is not conceptual. It's not. He's talking about topology, and he's talking about the design of a thing. And if I conceive it, if I create the concept too soon, I put myself in a box. I'm missing the point. In order to understand Bucky, I've got to let go of all the preconceived concepts and ideas and say, okay, what does that really mean? And that's his topological discussion. So it's really cool to be in a group of people who are willing to tackle that game. So thank you all for your participation and your contributions, and we'll see you next week. And I'm 2 minutes late.
All right. Okay, Steve.
Fantastic.
Good night,
Take
everybody.
care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.